They threw me in a concrete cell to protect his true love, leaving me to give birth to our son behind cold iron bars. 11 years later, I am completely exonerated. And the powerful alpha who ruined me, he is on his knees, begging for mercy. But I didn't just come back to ignore him. I came back to steal his son, seize his wealth, and build an empire that will burn his name to ashes. This is the story of how a broken Omega became a king.
The scent of cheap bleach could never quite mask the copper tang of blood and the damp, oppressive stench of despair that clung to the stone walls of Blackwood Penitentiary. For Julian, a male Omega whose life had once been defined by the soft luxury of silk sheets and the delicate fragrance of jasmine, the transition to coarse gray denim and iron bars had been a brutal, waking nightmare. He sat on the edge of his thin, lumpy cot, his hands resting protectively over the pronounced swell of his stomach. He was 8 months pregnant. Every breath felt like swallowing glass. His body, starved of the vital pheromones of an alpha to stabilize his gestation, was in a constant state of low-grade distress. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the howling void in his chest, the shattered bond that still bled inside his soul. "Keep your head down, 942, a guard barked, slamming a heavy nightstick against the iron bars of his cell. "Don't want you fainting before the warden's inspection. We don't coddle your kind here." Julian didn't look up. He didn't have the energy to care. His mind drifted back to the courtroom, the blinding camera flashes, and the cold, unyielding face of Arthur Vance. Arthur. His husband. His alpha. The man who had promised to protect him until their ashes mingled in the earth. They had been married for 2 years, a whirlwind romance that Julian had thought was built on genuine love. But it had all been an illusion, a beautiful lie that shattered the moment Clara, Arthur's childhood friend and the woman the high society elite whispered was Arthur's true destined mate, returned from abroad. The trap had been laid with terrifying precision. A glass of wine laced with a toxic, pregnancy-terminating compound. Clara collapsing at a high society gala, weeping and pointing a trembling finger at Julian. Arthur's sudden, violent shift from a doting husband to a vengeful monster. Julian remembered the way Arthur's powerful, dominant alpha scent, usually a comforting blend of cedarwood and dark chocolate, had turned toxic, suffocating him into submission. "How could you?" Arthur had roared, his voice laced with the alpha command that forced Julian to his knees, his throat tight, tears streaming down his face. "She is innocent, Julian. She is everything to me, and you tried to murder her and the child she might have carried for me. I will see you rot." Julian had begged. He had screamed his innocence. He had reached out to grab Arthur's tailored suit, pleading with him to look at his own pregnant mate, to see the truth in their bond. But Arthur had violently shaken him off. The court case was a farce, the Vance family money bought the judge, the jury, and the evidence. Within 3 weeks, Julian was stripped of his titles, his dignity, and thrown into a maximum security prison for a 15-year sentence. A sharp, sudden contraction rippled through Julian's abdomen, making him gasp and double over. He gripped the edge of the rusty frame, his knuckles turning stark white. "Not yet," he whispered, a fierce, protective instinct flaring to life in his chest. "Not here, my little one. Please, just hold on." The prison was dangerous for an Omega, let alone a pregnant one. The guards were ruthless, and the other inmates looked at him like a piece of meat or a weak link to be exploited. But something had fundamentally shifted inside Julian over the past few months. The soft, submissive Omega who lived to please his alpha had died the moment the prison gates slammed shut. In his place, a cold, hardened resolve was taking root. "Hey, Princess," a low, raspy voice called out from the dark corridor. Julian didn't look up, but he recognized the voice. It belonged to Marcus, an older beta serving a life sentence, who ran the prison's black market. Marcus was a man who traded in secrets, contraband, and survival. "You look terrible, kid," Marcus said, leaning casually against the bars, out of the direct line of sight of the guard tower. "You're burning up. If you don't get some real nutrients into your system, that baby isn't going to make it. And neither are you. I have nothing to trade, Marcus, Julian said, his voice raspy and devoid of emotion. Not right now, you don't, Marcus replied, a sharp, calculating glint in his eyes. But I know who you were. I know who Arthur Vance is. The man is expanding his shipping empire into the black market channels I used to control before I got put away. He's ruthless, but he's making enemies. Big ones. Marcus slid a small, foil-wrapped packet through the bottom gap of the bars. It contained a high-protein bar and a small vial of prenatal suppressants, contraband that must have cost a fortune inside. Why are you helping me? Julian asked, staring at the packet but not touching it yet. Consider it an investment, Marcus smirked, though his eyes remained deadly serious. I like a good underdog story. And I absolutely hate Arthur Vance. Eat. Stay alive. When the time comes, you and I are going to talk about how a prison cell can be the perfect place to build a kingdom. Julian reached out and took the packet. As another wave of pain washed over him, he looked down at his stomach, his eyes hardening into flint. He would survive. For his child, and for the day he would see Arthur Vance brought to his knees. The birth was a symphony of agony and silence. Julian refused to cry out. He knew that showing weakness in the infirmary of Blackwood Penitentiary was an invitation to predators. He lay on a cold, stainless steel table, his hands shackled to the sides, sweating and shaking as the indifferent prison doctor drank a cup of stale coffee. Push, 9:42. I don't have all night, the doctor muttered, checking his watch. With a final, agonizing effort that felt as though his very soul was being ripped apart, a thin, wailing cry pierced the sterile air of the room. It was a boy. A beautiful, fragile Omega boy, covered in a faint scent of fresh rain and linen. For a single, fleeting moment, joy pierced through Julian's armor. The nurses cleaned the baby and reluctantly placed him on Julian's chest. The moment the infant's skin touched his, Julian felt a profound, unbreakable bond lock into place. He named him Leo. He has his eyes, Julian whispered, a tear escaping his eye before he could stop it. Leo had the striking, sapphire blue eyes of Arthur Vance. But Julian quickly pushed the thought away. No. These were Leo's eyes now. Arthur had no claim to this child. He had abandoned them. The peace lasted less than an hour. The heavy metal door of the infirmary swung open, and the warden walked in, accompanied by a woman in a strict business suit. Julian's heart seized. He clutched Leo tighter to his chest, his inner Omega growling defensively, a low, desperate sound. Hand over the child, Julian, the warden said coldly. State regulation. Inmates serving sentences over 5 years cannot keep infants in the facility. He is being transferred to the state foster system. No. Julian screamed, the first time he had raised his voice since his incarceration. He fought against the shackles, the metal cutting deep into his wrists, drawing blood. No. You can't take him. Please. He's all I have. The woman in the suit stepped forward, her face expressionless. The paperwork is already signed. His birth certificate will list the father as unknown, per your request during intake. He will be placed in a closed adoption. Arthur did this, Julian hissed, his vision blurring with rage and heartbreak as 2 guards pinned his shoulders down, ruthlessly tearing the crying infant from his arms. He told you to take him. Please, don't do this. Arthur Vance has nothing to do with this, inmate, the warden scoffed. You're a criminal. You don't get to raise a child. As Leo's cries faded down the hallway, something inside Julian broke permanently. The last remnants of his innocence, his capacity for mercy, and his vulnerability were violently torn away. The crushing weight of the grief threatened to suffocate him, but instead of letting it consume him, he channeled it. He turned the pain into stone. He turned the love for his son into a weapon. A week later, Julian was back in the general population. He looked hollowed out, a ghost of his former self, but his eyes were completely dead. Marcus approached him during the yard hour. "I heard about the kid. I'm sorry." "Don't be," Julian said, his voice flat, devoid of any inflection. "It gives me a deadline." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Oh. And what's that?" "I need to control this prison, Marcus. I need to know every guard's price, every shipment that comes through the docks, every illegal gambling ring, and every corrupt politician who takes a bribe to keep this place running. I want to know who controls the money on the outside." Marcus stared at him for a long moment, seeing the terrifying transformation in the young Omega. The fragile flower had turned into nightshade. A slow, dark grin spread across the older man's face. "Well, then, kid. Welcome to the school of hard knocks. First lesson, wealth isn't made in the light. It's stolen in the dark. Let's start with the guard who controls the West Wing. He has a gambling debt." Over the next 5 years, Julian became a ghost in the machine. While the rest of the world forgot about the disgraced Omega of the Vance family, Julian was learning. Guided by Marcus, he mastered the art of leverage. He discovered that information was a currency far more valuable than gold. He started small, organizing the distribution of contraband, using the profits to bribe low-level guards. Within 3 years, he had dirt on the assistant warden. Within 5, he effectively ran the internal economy of Blackwood. He never forgot his son. Every penny he earned through his underground network was funneled out through a complex web of shell companies Marcus had helped him set up. The money was used for one specific purpose, a private investigator agency on the outside, tasked with tracking Leo's whereabouts and ensuring the boy was safe, healthy, and happy, all while keeping Julian's identity a total secret. Every night, Julian would look at a smuggled, grainy photograph of a young, blue-eyed boy playing in a park, adopted by a kind, working-class beta couple who had no idea their monthly, anonymous charity grant came from the most feared inmate in Blackwood Penitentiary. "Soon, Leo," Julian whispered to the photograph in the dark. "Soon, Papa will build a world where no one can ever touch us again. And your father will watch it all burn." 10 years in a maximum security prison can destroy a man, or it can forge him into something lethal. Julian had long since ceased to be the fragile, trusting Omega who had walked through the gates of Blackwood Penitentiary in chains. At 29, he was a vision of cold, sharp perfection. The harsh prison diet and relentless physical labor had stripped away his soft curves, leaving behind lean, corded muscle. His long, dark hair was kept tied back, and his silver eyes, once filled with warmth, now resembled shards of winter ice. He no longer lived in a cramped, standard cell. Through a meticulous web of blackmail, bribery, and economic dominance, Julian had effectively bought the prison's old, disused library wing. It was his command center. "The monthly reports from the outside, boss," Marcus said, stepping into the room. The older beta had aged significantly, his hair completely white, but his eyes were bright with deep respect as he looked at Julian. Marcus was no longer the mentor, he was the trusted advisor to a king. Julian reached out, taking the thick envelope. He ignored the financial ledger detailing the millions of dollars flowing through their various front corporations. Instead, his fingers flew directly to the smaller, unmarked envelope inside. He slid out the latest photographs of Leo. His son was 10 years old now. He was growing tall, with a bright, brilliant smile and those striking blue eyes. According to the private investigator's report, Leo was thriving in school, excelling in music, and living a peaceful life with his adoptive parents. The couple had recently received a lottery prize from a shell corporation, ensuring they could afford the best private education for the boy. A soft, genuine smile graced Julian's lips, a rare sight that only appeared once a month. "He's growing so fast, Marcus." "He looks like you," Marcus said gently, though they both knew the boy also carried the physical traits of Arthur Vance. The trust fund is secured. By the time he's 18, he will be one of the wealthiest young men in the country, completely detached from the Vance name. Julian's smile vanished, replaced by a chilly, calculated mask. He placed the photograph into a hidden compartment beneath his desk. "And what of my former husband?" Marcus sneered, pulling out a separate dossier. "Arthur Vance is on the verge of securing the massive Atlantic shipping contract. If he gets it, his family empire's valuation will triple. He's hailed as the golden boy of the elite. Meanwhile, Clara has been living high on the hog, using his money to fund her lavish lifestyle." Marcus paused, his eyes narrowing. "But our moles inside Vance Enterprises have uncovered something interesting. The accounting department has been cooking the books for years to hide massive losses in their tech sector. They are desperate for this Atlantic contract to stay afloat." Julian leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers rhythmically against the wooden desk. "Then we ensure he doesn't get it. Let him believe he has it in his grasp. Let him celebrate. And then, we pull the rug. We have the leverage to intercept the bidding process," Marcus agreed. "But Julian, there's a rumor circulating in the high courts. A deathbed confession from the lead detective who handled your case 10 years ago. He left a locked safe deposit box. The contents are being delivered to the federal prosecutor's office this week." Julian's eyes flashed dangerous silver. The framing. The corrupt trial. The lies that had ruined his life. "The truth is finally coming out," Julian murmured, his voice deadly quiet. "Arthur will finally realize what he did." "Are you ready for the fallout?" Marcus asked. "When the state exonerates you, the media circus will be unprecedented. Arthur will come crawling." Julian stood up, walking to the narrow, barred window that looked out over the stormy prison yard. The wind howled against the glass, matching the dark, turbulent storm brewing within his own soul. For 10 years, he had survived on nothing but absolute hatred and a fierce love for his son. He had built a shadowy, underground empire from a prison cell, controlling docks, legal firms, logistics companies, and information networks. "Let him crawl," Julian whispered, his reflection in the glass twisted into a dark, beautiful smile. "It will make it that much easier to step on his neck." The federal courtroom was dead silent. Arthur Vance sat in the front row, his chest tight, a cold sweat breaking out across his broad shoulders. He was 36 now, a powerful, dominant alpha whose commanding presence usually intimidated anyone in his vicinity. But today, his powerful cedarwood and chocolate scent was sour, spiked with a volatile mixture of horror, disbelief, and a mounting, suffocating panic. Beside him, Clara was trembling violently, her face pale beneath her thick makeup. The judge cleared his throat, his voice echoing through the microphone. "In light of the newly unearthed forensic evidence, the authenticated confession of former Detective Miller, and the decrypted digital logs proving the fabrication of the toxic substances, this court finds that Julian Vance, now Julian Sterling, was entirely fabricated against. The original conviction is vacated. Julian Sterling is completely exonerated of all charges, with the deepest apologies of the state." The courtroom erupted into a frenzy of camera flashes and shouting journalists. Arthur didn't hear any of it. His eyes were locked on the man standing at the defense table. Julian. It couldn't be him. The Julian Arthur remembered was a soft, delicate Omega who cried when a stray dog was hurt, who clung to Arthur's chest for protection, and whose scent was a sweet, submissive jasmine. The man standing before him now was a stranger. Julian stood tall, his posture regal and unyielding in a flawlessly tailored, dark charcoal suit that Marcus had arranged for him. His silver eyes were devoid of any warmth, reflecting the camera flashes like polished mirrors. His scent was no longer a submissive invitation, it was a muted, icy wall of absolute neutrality. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a god demanding tribute. "Julian." Arthur choked out, stepping past the mahogany barrier, his hand reaching out instinctively. His alpha inner wolf was screaming, howling in agony at the realization of what he had done to his own mate. He had thrown his innocent, pregnant Omega into hell. Julian, oh my God. Julian, please. Julian didn't flinch. He didn't even look at Arthur. He walked right past him as if the billionaire alpha were made of glass, his stride smooth and confident. Julian, look at me. Arthur begged, his voice cracking, a sound that shocked the surrounding reporters. The proud, arrogant Arthur Vance was publicly breaking down. I didn't know. The evidence, they showed me logs, they showed me the poison in your room. Clara told me. Arthur, please, he's a criminal. Clara shrieked, grabbing Arthur's arm, trying to pull him back. He probably paid someone to fake that confession. Don't look at him. Julian stopped. He slowly turned his head, his icy silver eyes locking onto Clara first. The sheer, freezing intensity of his gaze made the woman stumble backward, her breath catching in her throat. Then, Julian's gaze shifted to Arthur. For a second, Arthur felt a spark of hope. He opened his mouth to beg for forgiveness, to tell Julian that he would spend the rest of his life making it up to him, that they could rebuild their home, their family. Our baby, Arthur wanted to ask, what happened to our baby? But the words died in his throat as Julian spoke. His voice was low, smooth, and utterly terrifying in its lack of emotion. You are nothing to me, Mr. Vance, Julian said, loud enough for the reporters' microphones to catch every syllable. You are merely a ghost from a past life that I have outgrown. Do not speak to me again. Julian, no. Please. Our child. Arthur yelled as Julian turned his back on him once more, surrounded by a phalanx of heavily built, private security guards who pushed the press and Arthur away. Julian walked out of the courthouse and down the stone steps, where a sleek, black luxury sedan was waiting for him. Marcus held the door open, a proud, smirk on his face. As Julian stepped into the vehicle, leaving behind the chaotic circus of his past, he settled into the leather seat and looked out the window. He could see Arthur running out of the courthouse, being swallowed by a sea of reporters, looking broken, frantic, and utterly ruined. Where to, boss? Marcus asked, stepping into the front seat. Julian adjusted his cuffs, his eyes reflecting the dark tint of the windows. To the headquarters of Sterling Enterprises. It's time to introduce ourselves to the market. Let's start by destroying Arthur's Atlantic contract. The game had finally begun. The penthouse suite of Sterling Enterprises occupied the top 3 floors of a newly erected glass monolith in the heart of the city's financial district. From this vantage point, Julian could look down upon the entire metropolis, including the historic, neoclassical headquarters of Vance Enterprises situated just a few blocks away. Julian stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. He wore an ivory silk suit that contrasted sharply with his dark hair, looking every bit the high society Omega he had once been, yet radiating a chilling, untouchable authority that kept everyone at a respectful distance. The door to his office chimed, and Marcus walked in, holding a sleek tablet. The older man's face wore a grin of pure satisfaction. It's done, Julian, Marcus announced, tapping the screen to project a series of financial charts onto the wall. The board of the Atlantic Logistics Coalition just finalized the voting. They have officially rejected Vance Enterprises' bid. The contract has been awarded to our front company, Apex Shipping. Julian took a slow sip of his water, his expression unreadable. And how has Arthur reacted? Panicking, Marcus replied, leaning against the edge of the mahogany desk. Our moles inside his building report that he's been locked in his office for 14 hours. The loss of the Atlantic contract means he can't cover the hidden deficits in his tech division. His stock is already beginning to wobble. The vultures on Wall Street are smelling blood in the water. Good, Julian murmured, turning back to the window. But a cornered wolf is dangerous. Arthur will try to find a savior. He will look for liquidity, a loan, or a partner to bail him out. He already is, Marcus said, his smile widening. He's reached out to 3 major venture capital firms this morning. What he doesn't know is that Sterling Enterprises secretly bought a controlling interest in all 3 of them last year through our offshore entities. We are his potential saviors, Julian. He's walking right into the net. Before Julian could respond, his private secretary's voice came over the intercom. Mr. Sterling. I apologize for the interruption, but Mr. Arthur Vance is downstairs in the lobby. He doesn't have an appointment, but he refuses to leave. He is making a scene, sir. Security is prepared to remove him, but he's begging to see you. Julian's silver eyes flashed with a cold, predatory light. He looked at Marcus, who merely nodded, a dark smirk playing on his lips. Send him up, Julian commanded smoothly. But tell security to leave us. I want him to see exactly who holds the leash. A few minutes later, the heavy oak doors of Julian's office burst open. Arthur Vance stumbled into the room. The sight of him was jarring. The usually immaculate, arrogant alpha looked completely unraveled. His tie was loosened, his hair was messy, and his strong jaw was covered in dark stubble. The rich cedarwood and chocolate scent that had once filled Julian's world with comfort was now a chaotic, desperate mess of anxiety, guilt, and raw grief. The moment Arthur's eyes landed on Julian, his breath caught. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands trembling. Julian. Arthur choked out, his voice thick with emotion. Thank God. Thank God you didn't have them throw me out. Julian remained standing by the window, his posture perfectly still, his glass held loosely in his hand. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't even blink. He simply watched the alpha with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an insect. You want to find our child? Julian laughed, a low, melodic sound that chilled Arthur to the bone. Our child is safe. He is happy. And he will never, ever know that a monster like you is his father. I have erased you from his existence, just as I am going to erase you from this city. Julian straightened up, turning his back on the broken man. Marcus, throw this trash out of my office. And call our capital firms. Tell them to reject Vance Enterprises' request for a bailout. It's time to initiate the hostile takeover. The liquidation of Vance Enterprises was a bloodbath that high finance would talk about for decades. Within 48 hours of Arthur's rejection by the venture capital firms, Sterling Enterprises launched a coordinated short-selling campaign against Vance stock. Rumors of the company's fraudulent tech accounting leaked to the press, courtesy of Marcus's media contacts, and the board of directors panicked. One by one, the Vance family's loyal allies jumped ship, selling their shares for pennies on the dollar. And Julian bought every single one of them. By the end of the week, the name Vance was stripped from the building down the street. It was now a subsidiary of Sterling Enterprises. Arthur Vance was officially bankrupt, stripped of his assets, his reputation, and his home. 2 weeks later, Julian sat in the back seat of his sedan, watching a modest, tree-lined suburban park through the tinted windows. A few yards away, 10-year-old Leo was running across the grass, kicking a soccer ball with a group of friends. His laughter floated through the warm afternoon air, bright and completely untainted by the darkness of the world. Leo's adoptive parents sat on a nearby bench, sharing a thermos of coffee, watching the boy with deep affection. Julian rested his hand against the glass, his heart swelling with a warmth that he only allowed himself to feel in this specific spot. He had done it. He had built a fortress of wealth and power around his son, ensuring that Leo would always be protected, always loved, and never vulnerable to the whims of cruel alphas. The front door of the car opened, and Marcus climbed into the passenger seat. He didn't look back, giving Julian his privacy, but he spoke in a quiet, respectful tone. Arthur Vance has vacated his mansion, Marcus reported. He's moved into a small, dilapidated apartment on the south side of the city. He's taking a job as a low-level dispatcher at one of our old shipping yards. He looks like a ghost, Julian. He spends his nights drinking and searching the public adoption registries, looking for a boy who doesn't legally exist. Julian didn't take his eyes off Leo. Let him search. Let him spend the rest of his miserable life looking for a ghost. Are we finished with him, then? Marcus asked. Julian watched as Leo scored a goal, cheering wildly as his adoptive father clapped and threw his hands in the air. Julian's silver eyes softened, a deep, profound peace washing over him for the first time in 11 years. The revenge was sweet, but the redemption, the absolute safety of his child, was the true victory. Yes, Marcus, Julian whispered, a beautiful, genuine smile finally blooming on his face. We are finished. The empire is built. Now, we live. Julian leaned back into the leather seat, closing his eyes as the sedan smoothly pulled away from the curb, leaving the shadows of the past behind forever, driving toward a bright, golden future. The transition from a prison kingpin to a legitimate global tycoon was a seamless performance, but to Julian, the boardroom felt just as hypervigilant as the prison yard. The glass towers of Sterling Enterprises were cleaner, and the suits were more expensive, but the predators were exactly the same. They simply used contracts instead of shivs. 3 years had passed since the total collapse of Vance Enterprises. Julian was now 32, a man whose name was whispered in financial circles with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. He had completely reshaped his public image. No longer the broken, tragic figure of the Vance trial, he was a cold, untouchable enigma. Yet, despite his immense wealth, Julian's life remained fiercely solitary. He lived in a sprawling, ultra-secure penthouse that felt more like a luxurious fortress than a home. He rarely smelled the scents of other people, suppressing his own omega pheromones with medical-grade blocks. His life was an equation: protect Leo, expand the empire, maintain the walls. You're staring at the ledger again, Marcus said, stepping into the office. Marcus had officially taken the title of Chief Operating Officer, though his real job was still being Julian's shadow. We've completely absorbed the Western shipping lines. There's nothing left of Arthur's old network to squeeze. I'm not looking at the Vance accounts, Julian said smoothly, closing the digital tablet. I'm looking at the Horizon Group. Marcus's expression hardened. Ah. Raymond Vance. The true complication of Julian's systematic destruction of Arthur Vance was the extended family. Arthur had been the golden boy, but his cousin, Raymond Vance, was a completely different beast. Raymond was an alpha who had severed ties with Arthur years ago, moving his operations to Europe to build a ruthless, highly successful logistics conglomerate. He was older, vastly more calculated, and unlike Arthur, he didn't care about high society optics. Raymond Vance landed in the city this morning, Marcus warned, placing a fresh intelligence file on Julian's desk. He didn't come to bail his cousin out of the slums. He came to reclaim the territory. He's already called an emergency meeting of the Regional Logistics Board for tomorrow night. He's challenging our monopoly. Julian leaned back, a cold smile touching his lips. Let him challenge it. Arthur thought he was a king because of his name. Raymond will learn that names mean nothing in my city. There's something else, Marcus added, his voice dropping to a softer, more cautious register. Arthur was spotted near Leo's school yesterday. Julian froze. The air in the room instantly dropped several degrees. His silver eyes flashed with a primal, terrifying intensity that made even the seasoned beta step back. What did you say? Julian hissed, his voice laced with a lethal venom. He didn't touch him, and he didn't speak to him, Marcus said quickly, holding up a hand to placate him. Our security team caught him immediately. He was standing across the street, looking thin, unkempt, just staring at the kids playing soccer. He doesn't know Leo is his, Julian. He's just a broken, obsessed man looking at every child born around that time, desperate for a trace. Our team moved him along without a scene. But he's lingering. Julian stood up, his fists clenching so tightly his knuckles turned white. The primitive, protective Omega wolf inside him roared, demanding blood. Arthur had stolen his freedom, his dignity, and his early years with his son. The thought of that man even breathing the same air as Leo made Julian's stomach churn with a violent, murderous rage. Increase the perimeter security around Leo's house, Julian commanded, his voice shaking with restrained fury. Double the undercover guards. If Arthur so much as looks in that direction again, I don't care about the law, Marcus. Put him in a hole where the sun doesn't reach. Understood, Marcus nodded, his face grim. And the meeting with Raymond Vance tomorrow night? Julian adjusted his ivory cuffs, his face hardening back into a flawless, icy mask. I will attend. If the Vance family wants to send their best to fight me, I will show them exactly what happens to wolves who try to enter my den. The grand ballroom of the Obsidian Club was a sea of tailored tuxedos, glittering diamonds, and heavy, suffocating alpha pheromones. It was an elite, invitation-only gathering of the city's most powerful figures, and tonight, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Everyone knew that a territorial war was brewing between the reigning king of the underground, Julian Sterling, and the returning prodigal son of the old guard, Raymond Vance. When Julian entered the room, a collective hush fell over the crowd. He was stunning. He wore a midnight black tuxedo that hugged his lean, muscular frame perfectly. His dark hair was styled back, exposing his sharp, aristocratic jawline and those piercing silver eyes. He carried no scent, the heavy suppressants ensured he smelled like absolutely nothing, making him an anomaly in a room full of aggressive, posturing alphas. He looked like an apex predator disguised as poetry. Julian glided through the crowd, acknowledging the nods of corrupt politicians and trembling CEOs with a detached, regal indifference. He took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and made his way toward the balcony, preferring the crisp night air to the suffocating room. It's rude to hide from your guests of honor, Mr. Sterling. The voice was deep, resonant, and vibrated with a smooth, terrifyingly dark power. Julian turned slowly. Standing in the doorway of the balcony was Raymond Vance. Raymond did not look like Arthur. Where Arthur had been boyishly handsome and arrogant, Raymond was rugged, seasoned, and carried the scars of a man who had fought his way to the top. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. But it was his scent that caught Julian entirely off guard. Most alphas Julian encountered had scents that were loud, aggressive, and suffocating, designed to force submission. Raymond's scent was different. It was a rich, intoxicating blend of weathered leather, smoky bourbon, and a faint hint of ozone before a lightning strike. It didn't demand submission, it commanded absolute attention. It was heavy, dark, and utterly hypnotic. For the first time in over a decade, Julian felt a strange, involuntary shiver run down his spine. His inner Omega, long buried under layers of iron and ice, stirred slightly. He immediately crushed the feeling, his expression freezing into a look of supreme boredom. Mr. Vance, Julian said, his voice smooth and empty. I wasn't hiding. I was simply enjoying the silence before I have to dismantle your ambitions. Raymond let out a low, dark chuckle, stepping onto the balcony. He didn't invade Julian's personal space, but his presence was so massive that he seemed to alter the air pressure around them. He leaned against the stone railing, looking out over the city skyline before turning his stormy eyes back to Julian. You're as sharp as the rumors say, Raymond murmured, his gaze tracing the lines of Julian's face with an intensity that felt almost physical. My cousin was an idiot. A weak, short-sighted boy who had a diamond in his hands and threw it into the mud because he couldn't handle the brilliance. Julian's eyes narrowed into dangerous silver slits. If you came here to plead for Arthur, you are wasting your breath. Plead for him? Raymond laughed, a genuine, rich sound. I couldn't care less about Arthur. He dragged our family name through the dirt with his pathetic, emotional scandals. I'm a businessman, Julian. I don't care about past grudges. I care about efficiency. Then you should know that your efficiency is about to run into a wall, Julian replied, stepping closer, refusing to be intimidated by the alpha's sheer size. The shipping lanes are mine. The infrastructure is mine. You have no leverage here. Raymond tilted his head, his dark eyes locking onto Julian's lips for a fraction of a second before meeting his gaze again. I have the European ports, Julian. You have the domestic lanes. We could spend the next 5 years bleeding each other dry in a petty turf war, or we could combine forces. We could control the global flow of commerce. I don't need a partner, Julian said coldly. And I certainly don't need a Vance. I am not my cousin, Raymond said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously smooth, a low vibration that seemed to target Julian's very core. He took a single step forward, his scent flaring just enough to wrap around Julian like a heavy velvet cloak. I don't want to conquer you, Julian. I want to build a kingdom with you. Think about it. I'll be seeing you very soon. With a polite, mocking bow of his head, Raymond turned and walked back into the ballroom, leaving Julian alone on the balcony. Julian stood perfectly still, his hand gripping the stone railing so hard the marble creaked. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He took a deep breath, trying to clear his lungs of the leather and bourbon scent that still hung in the air. He was angry. Not because Raymond had challenged him, but because for a split second, the impenetrable fortress Julian had spent 10 years building inside his soul had felt a tremor. Marcus, Julian spoke into his earpiece, his voice tight and demanding. Yes, boss. Run a deeper check on Raymond Vance. Everything. His assets, his history, his weaknesses. Julian stared out at the dark city, his eyes flashing. He thinks he's a different kind of wolf. I'm going to prove to him that in this city, all wolves bleed the same. The financial district of the city became a digital battlefield over the next 3 weeks. Julian did not sleep more than 4 hours a night. Every morning began the same way. A strict physical workout to burn off the restless energy that had plagued him since his encounter with Raymond Vance, followed by hours of reviewing global shipping manifests, port authority logs, and stock market fluctuations. Raymond Vance was not fighting like Arthur. Arthur had used blunt force, legal corruption, and societal isolation to crush Julian. Raymond, however, was playing an intricate game of economic chess. He didn't try to buy out Julian's subsidiaries. Instead, he began offering more lucrative, efficient alternatives to Julian's international clients, slowly chipping away at the edges of Sterling Enterprises' shipping monopoly. He bypassed our domestic customs network entirely, Marcus reported during a high-level briefing in Julian's private office. He slid a map across the glass table. Raymond signed a private treaty with the northern tribal ports. He's moving European goods through the sovereign waters, avoiding our tariffs completely. It's brilliant, legal, and it's costing us $3 million a week in projected revenue. Julian stared at the map, his silver eyes cold and analytical. He's trying to force my hand. He wants me to negotiate. Are you going to? Marcus asked, watching his boss closely. He had noticed a subtle change in Julian over the past month. The absolute, dead passivity had been replaced by a sharp, vital spark of irritation, and focus. Raymond Vance was drawing the ghost back into the living world, even if it was through rivalry. No, Julian said flatly. If I sit at a table with him now, I do so from a position of irritation. We strike back at his supply chain. Marcus, find out who manufactures the container ships for the Horizon Group. Buy the manufacturing plants. Marcus blinked, a slow, appreciative grin spreading across his face. Go after the vessels themselves. Cut off his ability to expand his fleet. That's a massive capital investment, Julian. We have the liquidity, Julian replied coldly. Do it. As Marcus exited the room to execute the order, Julian leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his temples. The suppressants he took to completely mask his Omega scent were beginning to give him a dull, chronic headache. His doctor had warned him that suppressing his natural biology so aggressively for over a decade would eventually take a toll on his nervous system, but Julian didn't care. The scent was a vulnerability. In his world, vulnerability meant a return to iron bars. His desk phone chimed. It was his personal assistant. "Mr. Sterling, a courier just delivered a package for you. It bypassed the mailroom because it has a diplomatic seal from the European Maritime Ministry. It's addressed to you personally." "Bring it in," Julian said. A few moments later, a small, polished wooden box was placed on his desk. Julian checked it for electronic signatures or hidden devices before opening it. Inside rested an exquisite, antique silver chess piece, a king. And a small, handwritten card. The elegant, masculine script belonged to Raymond. To build a kingdom, one must first respect the opponent's pieces. The northern ports were just an opening gambit, Julian. I look forward to your response. Dinner tomorrow night at La Mer. Just the two of us. Let's talk about the manufacturing plants you are currently trying to buy. Julian's breath caught slightly. Raymond already knew about his move to buy the shipyards. The Alpha's intelligence network was terrifyingly fast. He looked down at the Silver King, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. Raymond wasn't running away from the fight, he was reveling in it. And for the first time in his life, Julian felt a dangerous, thrilling sensation: he was being matched. The restaurant, La Mer, was entirely empty when Julian arrived. Raymond had bought out the entire establishment for the evening, ensuring absolute privacy. The space was beautiful, lit only by soft candlelight and the natural glow of the moon reflecting off the ocean waves visible through the massive glass windows. Julian wore a sharp, tailored slate-gray suit. He had deliberately skipped his evening dose of suppressants, knowing that Raymond's powerful scent would overwhelm him if his own system was entirely compromised by chemicals. He needed his natural instincts sharp. Raymond was already seated at a secluded corner table. He stood up immediately as Julian approached, his tall, imposing figure casting a long shadow in the candlelight. Tonight, he wore a dark navy suit without a tie, looking relaxed yet incredibly commanding. His scent, that intoxicating blend of leather, rich bourbon, and ozone, drifted across the space, instantly wrapping around Julian's senses. "You came," Raymond said, his voice a low, warm baritone. He stepped forward and pulled out a chair for Julian, his movements smooth and respectful. "I must admit, I wasn't entirely sure you would accept the invitation. I am here to see how much you know about my business operations, Mr. Vance," Julian said coldly, seating himself and refusing to look directly into Raymond's stormy eyes. "And to tell you to stay out of my shipyards." Raymond smiled, returning to his seat across the table. "The shipyards are already yours, Julian. My sources tell me your acquisition contracts were signed 3 hours ago. Congratulations. You successfully cut off my secondary supply chain." Julian paused, his silver eyes locking onto Raymond's face. "You don't seem upset." "Why should I be?" Raymond poured a dark red wine into Julian's glass, his hand steady. "It was a brilliant countermove. You forced me to look for domestic manufacturing, which actually saves me 5% on import taxes. You see, every time we fight, we actually make each other sharper. We are natural partners, Julian." "Partnership requires trust," Julian scoffed, taking a sip of the wine, ignoring how perfectly the vintage complemented the tense atmosphere. "And I trust a Vance as far as I can throw one. Your family proved to me exactly what your bloodline is capable of." The relaxed smile slowly faded from Raymond's face. He placed his wine glass down, his expression becoming solemn, his dark eyes filled with an intense, unyielding sincerity. "What Arthur did to you was a crime against nature," Raymond said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, intense register that vibrated straight through Julian's chest. An alpha is meant to protect their mate with their life. Arthur allowed himself to be blinded by a pathetic, manipulative woman and his own fragile ego. He threw away a beautiful, brilliant Omega because he didn't have the strength to be a real alpha. Do not confuse his weakness with my character, Julian. Julian's hand tightened around the stem of his glass. The raw honesty in Raymond's voice was devastating. It didn't feel like a corporate negotiation, it felt like a direct assault on the walls around his heart. You speak as if you know me, Julian whispered, his voice laced with defensive ice. I know your work, Raymond replied softly, leaning forward across the table, his scent flaring slightly, warm and comforting rather than aggressive. I watched how you took a broken, corrupt prison economy and turned it into a financial empire. I know the sheer, terrifying strength it takes for an Omega to survive what you survived and come out a king. I don't want to conquer you, Julian. I want to protect what you've built. I want to give you a space where you don't have to keep your claws out every second of the day. For a long moment, the silence between them stretched, thick with an unspoken, heavy tension. Julian's inner Omega hummed, a soft, dangerous vibration of acknowledgement. Raymond's words were a balm to a decade-old wound, an acknowledgement of his strength rather than his victimhood. But then, the phantom sound of a baby crying in a cold, dark hallway echoed in Julian's mind. The memory of his son being ripped from his arms re-anchored him to his reality. Julian stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The dinner was lovely, Mr. Vance, Julian said, his face completely closed off once more, his silver eyes flashing like cold metal. But you are mistaken. I do not need an alpha to protect me. I am the danger in this city. Enjoy your remaining shipping lanes while you can. By next month, I will own those too. He turned and walked away, his stride fast and unyielding. Raymond did not follow him. He sat back in his chair, watching Julian's retreating figure with a slow, fascinated smile. He raised his glass toward the empty space. Run all you want, my fierce king, Raymond murmured into the quiet room, his scent lingering in the air. But a real wolf always knows how to track his mate. The confrontation at La Mer left an invisible, irritating residue on Julian's skin. For days, no matter how many times he showered, he could still faintly trace the ghostly scent of leather and bourbon in the corners of his mind. It frustrated him. He doubled his dosage of suppressants, burying his Omega instincts back beneath a mountain of synthetic chemicals and cold, unforgiving data. But the universe had no intention of letting Julian remain in his frozen sanctuary. We have a problem on the south side, Marcus said, walking into Julian's office without his usual calm demeanor. His brow was furrowed, and he held a printed security log. It's Arthur. Julian didn't look up from his monitors. I thought I told you to have him removed if he neared Leo's perimeter. He didn't go to the house or the school this time, Marcus explained, stepping closer. He went to the Regional Adoption Archive office. He's been tracking the specific transit logs from Blackwood Penitentiary for the month Leo was born. The archive guards are on our payroll, so they flagged his name the moment he requested the microfilm. But Julian. Arthur is desperate. He sold the last of his family heirlooms, a vintage watch, to hire a low-grade, back-alley hacker to break into the state's sealed digital vault. Julian's fingers hovered over his keyboard. The icy composure that defined him fractured for a dangerous split second. Did the hacker get through? Julian's voice was dangerously quiet. No. Our security firewalls isolated the intrusion before they could access the encrypted names, Marcus replied. But Arthur is getting close. He knows the child was processed through the county system. He's like a dog digging for a bone, Julian. He has nothing left to lose, no reputation to protect, and his mind is completely unhinged by guilt. If he keeps scratching, he might stumble onto the beta couple's names through pure luck. Julian stood up, the chair rolling violently backward. The protective fury of a parent overrode every corporate strategy he had engineered. Arthur had taken his youth. He had taken his freedom. He would never touch his child. "Bring the car around," Julian ordered, his silver eyes flashing with lethal intent. "I'm going to end this myself." "Julian, wait," Marcus cautioned, reaching out a hand. "If you go to him directly, you validate his search. You show him that there is something to find." "Let me handle it. A quiet accident at the shipping docks." "No," Julian interrupted, his voice cutting like a razor. "He needs to know the exact boundary he is crossing. He needs to look into my eyes and understand that if he takes one more step toward that boy, I will destroy whatever wretched piece of life he has left. Get the car." The apartment complex on the south side was a decaying concrete monolith, smelling of rusted iron, stale garbage, and damp misery. It was the exact type of place Julian had spent 10 years trying to forget. To see Arthur Vance, a man who had once ruled the city from a gilded throne, living in such squalor was a testament to the absolute ruin Julian had inflicted upon him. Julian walked up the creaking stairwell, flanked by 2 massive security guards. He wore a pristine charcoal cashmere coat, a stark, surreal contrast to the peeling wallpaper and flickering fluorescent lights of the hallway. He stopped in front of door 4B. He didn't knock. One of his guards stepped forward and hit the lock with a heavy, specialized tool, forcing the door open with a sharp crack. Inside, the apartment was dark, illuminated only by the gray light filtering through a dirty window. The air was heavy with the sour, unwashed scent of a depressed alpha. A tragic, decaying version of the cedarwood and chocolate that Julian had once loved. Papers were scattered everywhere, old court documents, microfiche printouts, and blurred maps of the city's adoption districts. Arthur sat at a small wooden table, holding a glass of cheap whiskey. He looked decades older than 36. His eyes were bloodshot, his face gaunt, and his clothes tattered. When he looked up and saw Julian standing in his doorway, the glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the linoleum floor. "Julian!" Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. He scrambled to his feet, his entire body trembling as he stared at the magnificent, untouchable Omega before him. You came here. To me?" Julian stepped into the room, his expression completely blank, his boots clicking softly against the floor. He looked at the papers scattered across the table, his eyes stopping on a sticky note with Leo's birth date written on it. "You are pushing your luck, Arthur," Julian said, his voice flat, devoid of any human warmth. "I'm close, Julian," Arthur cried out, taking a frantic step forward before the guards instantly raised their hands, stopping him in his tracks. Arthur fell to his knees, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. "I know our boy is out there. I know he's in the city. Please, Julian. I'm not trying to take him from you. I just want to see him. I just want to know he's alive. I want to tell him I'm sorry." "He is not your boy," Julian spat, the words hitting Arthur like physical blows. "He belongs to a family that loves him. A family that doesn't throw innocent people into maximum security prisons to protect a lying whore. I was wrong." Arthur screamed, bowing his head to the floor, his broad shoulders shaking with violent, pathetic sobs. "I am a monster. I know what I did. I dream about the courtroom every night, Julian. I dream about you screaming for me while they dragged you away. Please, hit me, kill me, take my life, but don't keep my son in the dark. Let me give him my inheritance." "What inheritance?" Julian laughed, a cold, mocking sound that echoed off the bare walls. "I own your house. I own your stocks. I own the very yard you work at. You have nothing to give him but your shame." Julian walked up to the kneeling Alpha, bending down just enough to look directly into Arthur's broken, watery blue eyes. "Listen to me very carefully, Arthur," Julian whispered, his silver eyes burning with an absolute, terrifying promise. "If I see your name near an archive, a school, or a hacker again, I will not just ruin you financially. I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in the deepest, darkest hole Blackwood Penitentiary has to offer. I will make sure you never see the sun again. Do you understand me? Arthur stared at him, completely crushed, his spirit entirely broken by the sheer, unyielding hatred radiating from his former mate. He let out a low, whimpering groan, nodding his head in total defeat. Julian straightened up, turning his back on the pathetic display. Clean this room, he ordered his guards. Burn every piece of paper regarding the adoption logs. As Julian walked out into the corridor, his heart was pounding. The encounter had given him no satisfaction, only a deep, exhausting emptiness. He walked down the stairs, stepping out into the chilly night air, desperately needing to escape the suffocating aura of his past. He reached his waiting sedan, but before he could open the door, a tall, commanding figure stepped out from the shadows of the street lamp. It was Raymond Vance. Raymond wore a long black overcoat, his stormy eyes fixed on Julian with a mixture of intense concern and dark authority. His heavy, intoxicating scent of leather, bourbon, and ozone instantly cut through the sour stench of the slums, wrapping around Julian like a protective shield. "What are you doing here, Raymond?" Julian asked, his voice tight, his defenses snapping right back into place. Raymond walked over, stopping just inches from Julian, completely ignoring the security guards who instinctively moved to intervene. Raymond looked up at the dingy apartment window, then back down at Julian's pale face. "I have eyes on my cousin, Julian," Raymond said softly, his voice a low, soothing rumble that sent an involuntary shiver through Julian's tense frame. "I knew he was scratching around places he shouldn't. And I knew you would come here to deal with it." "It's none of your business," Julian hissed, trying to step around him. Raymond reached out, his large, warm hand gently gripping Julian's forearm. The touch was electric. Even through the thick fabric of their coats, Julian felt a jolt of pure, raw alpha energy that made his inner Omega gasp. "It is my business if it brings you to a place like this," Raymond said, his dark eyes locking onto Julian's with an intensity that refused to let go. "You don't belong in the mud with him anymore, Julian. You're a king. Let me handle Arthur. I will ensure he never leaves his room again. Let me carry the dirt so you can stay in the light." Julian stared at Raymond, his breath hitched in his throat. For the first time in 11 years, an alpha wasn't trying to take something from him. He was offering to protect him. Julian violently pulled his arm away, fighting the terrifying warmth spreading through his chest. "I don't need your help, Raymond," he whispered, stepping into his car and slamming the door. As the sedan sped away into the night, Julian looked out the rear window. Raymond remained standing under the street lamp, unmoving, watching him go with the patient, unyielding gaze of a wolf who had already claimed his prize. The human body is an intricate machine, but it cannot run indefinitely on spite, synthetic chemicals, and raw willpower. For Julian, the bill came due on a rainy Tuesday morning. He was standing in the center of his penthouse boardroom, reviewing the European port acquisition data with Marcus, when a sudden, blinding vertigo struck him. The digital screens blurred into a smear of neon light. His heart hammered erratically against his ribs, and a wave of intense, suffocating heat washed over his skin. "Julian?" Marcus's voice sounded muffled, as if underwater. "Julian, you're bleeding." Julian lifted a trembling hand to his face and brushed his upper lip. His fingers came away stained with a stark, dark crimson. "I'm fine," Julian rasped, but his legs betrayed him. The strength drained from his knees, and he stumbled backward. Before he could hit the floor, a pair of strong, steady arms caught him. But it wasn't Marcus. The scent came first, a massive, crashing wave of rich bourbon, weathered leather, and the electric tang of ozone. It cut through Julian's failing senses like a lighthouse beam through a dense fog. Raymond Vance had just entered the building for an unscheduled negotiation, only to find the formidable Julian Sterling collapsing in his own office. "Clear the room," Raymond roared, his powerful alpha voice laced with a dominant command that brooked no argument. The lower-level executive scrambled out the door in terror. Raymond didn't wait for Marcus to protest. He scooped Julian up into his arms, lifting him as if he weighed nothing, and carried him straight toward the private lounge attached to the office. "Get his doctor here." Now, Raymond barked at Marcus over his shoulder as he gently laid Julian down on the plush velvet sofa. Julian fought to sit up, his silver eyes wild and defensive even as his body trembled violently. "Get away from me," he gasped, his inner Omega panicking at the proximity of such a powerful alpha. Don't touch me." "Sit still, you stubborn creature," Raymond murmured, his voice softening into a low, soothing rumble. He didn't pull away. Instead, he unbuttoned the collar of Julian's shirt, his large, warm hands deliberately radiating a calming, stabilizing alpha warmth. When Julian's personal physician arrived 20 minutes later, the diagnosis was grim but predictable. The doctor looked at the blood tests and sighed, shaking his head at Julian. "Your endocrine system is crashing, Mr. Sterling. You have been taking triple the recommended dose of Class A omega suppressants for over a decade. Your body is starved of natural alpha pheromones to balance your cycle, and your system is trying to force a severe, delayed heat to flush out the toxicity. If you take one more suppressant pill, you risk permanent neurological damage. Or worse." Julian turned his head toward the wall, his jaw clenched. "Give me a temporary blocker. I have a merger to finalize next week." "No," a voice intervened from the doorway. Raymond walked back into the room, holding a glass of water and a damp cloth. He looked at the doctor. "What does he need to heal safely?" "Rest. Complete isolation from corporate stress for at least a week," the doctor replied, sensing the raw, protective authority radiating from Raymond. "And he needs to be exposed to a stable, compatible alpha sent to soothe his distressed nervous system. No suppressants. His body needs to breathe. He will stay at my estate north of the city," Raymond decided smoothly, his stormy eyes locking onto Julian's pale, furious face. "It's completely secure. No press, no phones, no board meetings." "I would rather rot," Julian hissed, trying to stand, but a sharp spike of pain in his temples forced him back onto the cushions. Raymond walked over, kneeling beside the sofa so they were at eye level. He didn't use an alpha command, he simply spoke with an absolute, unshakable devotion that made Julian's heart skip a beat. "You have spent 11 years being a shield for everyone else, Julian," Raymond whispered, his thumb gently brushing a stray lock of dark hair from Julian's damp forehead. "Let me be the shield for a week. Your empire won't crumble if you take a breath. I won't let it." For the first time in his life, Julian had no countermove. His body was broken, and as he looked into Raymond's earnest, protective eyes, the ice around his heart cracked just a fraction deeper. Raymond's estate was a sprawling, architectural masterpiece hidden deep within a centuries-old pine forest. Constructed of dark timber and massive panels of glass, it overlooked a secluded, mist-shrouded lake. There were no sirens here, no flashing cameras, no whispers of high finance. Only the wind through the trees and the steady, comforting rhythm of nature. For the first 3 days, Julian slept almost continuously. Without the synthetic suppressants forcing his body into a state of artificial numbness, his natural biology began to reassert itself. His skin grew flushed, and a faint, long-forgotten sweetness began to bleed back into the air, the delicate, intoxicating scent of pure jasmine. When he finally woke up on the 4th afternoon, he felt lighter than he had in years. The chronic headache was gone. He walked down the grand, open-concept staircase, wearing a soft, oversized cashmere sweater that Raymond's staff had provided. Follow the scent of wood smoke and fresh coffee, he found himself stepping out onto a massive wraparound wooden deck. Raymond was there, wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, splitting logs of firewood with an axe. His muscles flexed fluidly with every strike, sweat glistening on his tanned skin. The sight was undeniably magnificent, a display of raw, functional alpha strength that had nothing to do with corporate posturing. As if sensing Julian's presence, Raymond stopped, burying the axe into a log. He wiped his brow and turned, a warm, genuine smile breaking across his rugged features. "You're awake," Raymond said, walking up the steps of the deck. As he drew closer, his nostrils flared slightly, inhaling the sweet jasmine scent drifting from Julian. His stormy eyes darkened with a sudden, intense hunger, but he immediately reined it in, keeping a respectful distance. "You look beautiful, Julian. The color is back in your cheeks." Julian looked down at his hands, feeling suddenly exposed without his tailored suits and icy corporate armor. "How long have I been asleep?" "Nearly 70 hours, Raymond replied, pouring a cup of fresh coffee from a thermal carafe and handing it to him. Marcus called. "Your companies are running perfectly. He's handling the daily operations. You haven't lost a single penny." Julian took the warm mug, his fingers brushing against Raymond's. A spark of pure electricity shot up his arm, making his breath hitch. He walked over to the wooden railing, looking out over the glassy surface of the lake. "Why are you doing this, Raymond?" Julian asked softly, the wind rustling his dark hair. "You are a Vance. You should want to conquer me, to take my market share, to avenge what I did to your cousin. Instead, you are nursing me back to health. What is your angle?" Raymond walked up beside him, leaning his large frame against the railing, looking out at the water. "I told you before, Julian. I don't care about Arthur. And my only angle is you," Raymond said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register that resonated deep within Julian's soul. "When I look at you, I don't see a corporate rival to be defeated. I see a man who has endured hell and built a heaven out of pure defiance. I admire you. I respect you. And if you would let me, I want to court you. Properly. Not for an empire, but for the man behind it." Julian's heart hammered violently against his ribs. The sincerity in Raymond's voice was terrifying because it was exactly what his buried, wounded Omega self had hungered for all these years, a safe harbor. "I don't know how to be courted, Raymond," Julian whispered, his silver eyes cracking with a rare, raw vulnerability. "The last alpha who claimed to love me threw me to the wolves the moment it became inconvenient. I am broken inside. I am cold. I don't think I have any warmth left to give anyone." Raymond stepped closer, his heavy, comforting scent of leather and bourbon wrapping around Julian like a protective blanket, soothing the final remnants of his biological distress. He reached out, his large hand gently cupping Julian's cheek, his thumb wiping away a solitary tear that had escaped the Omega's eye. "You aren't broken, Julian. You are tempered, like steel," Raymond murmured, his gaze locking onto Julian's lips with a profound, aching tenderness. "And I have plenty of warmth for both of us. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." As the sun began to set over the lake, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and violet, Julian didn't pull away from Raymond's touch. For the first time in 11 years, he allowed himself to lean into the warmth of an alpha, letting the ice around his soul melt into the quiet, healing night. The sanctuary of the forest could not keep the outside world at bay forever. By the 7th day, Julian's recovery was complete. His silver eyes had regained their lethal, predatory clarity, and his posture was once again that of a monarch. But the ice that had once encased his heart hadn't frozen back over, instead, it had been replaced by a carefully controlled fire. He stood in Raymond's study, dressed in a fresh slate blue suit that Marcus had sent over. Raymond sat at his desk, watching Julian with an expression that bordered on reverence. The week of intimacy, of shared mornings by the lake, quiet dinners, and the slow, deliberate merging of their scents, had forged an unspoken bond between them. Julian's jasmine now danced perfectly with Raymond's leather and bourbon. The piece shattered when Marcus's face appeared on the encrypted video monitor on the wall. The older beta looked pale, his usual stoic composure entirely gone. "Julian," Marcus said, his voice tight with panic. We have a situation. A catastrophic one. Julian stepped toward the screen, his entire body tensing. What happened, Marcus? Is it the European merger? No. It's Leo. The room instantly felt as though the oxygen had been sucked out of it. Julian's breath caught in his throat. Raymond stood up from his desk immediately, moving to Julian's side, his hand instinctively coming to rest on the small of Julian's back to steady him. Arthur didn't listen to you, Marcus continued grimly. The warning you gave him in his apartment, it broke what little sanity he had left. He realized that the only reason you would threaten him so violently was if he was close to the truth. He didn't search the adoption archives again. Instead, he went to the high society schools, tracking every child whose tuition was paid by an anonymous charity grant linked to Sterling Enterprises. He found Leo's adoptive parents' address this morning. Julian's vision blurred with a sudden, violent rush of blood. Where is Arthur now? Our undercover security team at the house intercepted him just as he was approaching the boy in the park, Marcus said, sweat glistening on his forehead. There was a struggle, Julian. Arthur was unhinged. He had a weapon. One of our guards was forced to discharge his firearm. Arthur he's alive, but he's in critical condition at the City General Hospital. But that's not the worst of it. Julian gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning stark white. Tell me. Because a firearm was discharged in a public park, the police flooded the scene. Leo and his adoptive parents were taken to the precinct for protection and questioning. The media got hold of the story. They know a Vance was shot near a child connected to your charity. They are putting the pieces together, Julian. The press is descending on the police station right now. Within an hour, they will broadcast Leo's face across every news channel in the country. No, Julian whispered, a cold, suffocating horror washing over him. No, no, no. His life will be ruined. The Vance name will drag him down into the mud. I'm trying to suppress the media layout, boss, but the police chief is an old ally of the Vance family's remaining board members. He leaks everything to vindicate Arthur, Marcus groaned. Julian felt his knees weaken, the ancient trauma of the courtroom threatening to swallow him whole. He was about to lose his son all over again, this time to the blinding light of a public scandal. Suddenly, a massive, warm hand gripped his shoulder, pulling him firmly against a broad, unyielding chest. Raymond's scent flared, not in aggression, but in a towering, protective wall of absolute authority that instantly cut through Julian's panic. Marcus, Raymond commanded, his voice a low, terrifying growl that rattled the speakers. Activate my private security detail in the city. Have them surround that police precinct. No press gets within a block of that child. Mr. Vance. Marcus blinked, surprised to see the rival Alpha taking charge. Do it now, Raymond ordered. He turned his face to Julian, his dark eyes burning with an intense, fierce devotion. Look at me, Julian. Julian looked up, his silver eyes wide with desperation. We are going down there, Raymond said, his voice steady, a rock in the middle of a raging storm. We are going to get your son. And I promise you, by the time the sun sets today, the Vance name will never be able to touch him again. Trust me. For a split second, the old Julian, the one who trusted no one, wanted to push him away. But as he looked into Raymond's stormy eyes, he saw no deceit. He saw an Alpha willing to burn the world down to keep him safe. Julian nodded, his voice returning with a sharp, lethal edge. Let's go. The downtown police precinct was a war zone of flashing blue lights, shouting journalists, and heavy iron barricades. A sea of reporters stood outside the stone steps, cameras aimed at the doors, waiting for a statement on the bizarre shooting involving the disgraced billionaire Arthur Vance and a mysterious 10-year-old boy. Inside the precinct's private briefing room, Leo sat on a plastic chair, clutching his adoptive mother's hand. The young boy's blue eyes were wide with fear, tears drying on his cheeks as two gruff detectives questioned his parents about their financial ties to Julian Sterling. The heavy oak doors of the precinct didn't just open, they were violently thrown back against the wall. A dozen heavily armed, private tactical guards in black uniforms entered first, instantly forming a human wall that pushed the police officers and staff back against the desks. The sheer, overwhelming dominance of the entry silenced the entire room. Then, walked in Julian Sterling and Raymond Vance. Julian looked like an avenging angel. His cashmere coat billowed behind him, his silver eyes scanning the room until they landed on Leo. His heart turned over in his chest. His inner Omega screamed to run to his child, to hold him, to scent him. But he forced himself to stay controlled. He could not reveal his identity to the boy in a place like this. The police captain stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. What is the meaning of this? This is a government facility. You can't bring private security in here. Raymond Vance stepped in front of Julian, his towering 6'4" frame casting a massive, terrifying shadow over the captain. Raymond's scent flared, a suffocating, dominant alpha pressure that made half the beta officers in the room drop their heads instinctively. "Shut your mouth, Captain," Raymond said, his voice a dangerous, low vibration that promised violence. He dropped a thick, leather-bound document onto the captain's desk with a heavy thud. "That child and his family are under the direct legal protection of the Horizon Group and the European Maritime Ministry. This is an international diplomatic injunction. You will cease your questioning immediately." The captain stammered, looking at the gold-embossed seal on the paperwork. "Mr. Vance. Arthur Vance is your cousin. He's in the hospital." "Arthur Vance is a criminal who violated a restraining order and attempted a kidnapping," Raymond interrupted coldly, his eyes narrowing into slits. "If a single photograph of that boy leaves this precinct, if a single leak is traced back to your officers, I will buy this city's municipal bond debt and dismantle your entire department by Monday morning. Do I make myself clear?" The captain swallowed hard, his face draining of color. He nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." Julian walked past the captain, his eyes locked entirely on Leo's adoptive parents. The couple looked up at him, recognizing the face of the billionaire who had secretly funded their lives, their eyes filled with deep gratitude and relief. Julian knelt down in front of Leo, keeping his distance so as not to scare the boy. Up close, Leo's blue eyes, the only part of Arthur he carried, looked at Julian with a strange, innocent curiosity. "Are you okay, little one?" Julian asked, his voice softer than anyone in the room had ever heard it. It was a melody of pure, maternal love wrapped in silk. Leo nodded, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "Yes, sir. The bad man tried to grab my bag, but the security guard stopped him." "You are safe now," Julian whispered, a tear threatening to spill from his silver eyes, though he held it back with supreme effort. He looked up at the adoptive parents. "My cars are in the back. They will take you to a private airfield. You are moving to a coastal estate in southern France tonight. Your lives here are finished, but your new life will be completely safe. No one will ever find you there." The adoptive mother wept, nodding frantically. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Thank you." As Raymond's security team escorted the family out through a secure basement exit, completely bypassing the media circus outside, Julian stood up. He walked to the window, watching the black SUVs pull away into the rainy afternoon, carrying his son toward a safe, golden future where the shadows of Blackwood Penitentiary could never reach him. The weight of 11 years of terror, survival, and warfare seemed to lift from Julian's shoulders all at once. He closed his eyes, a deep, shuddering breath escaping his lips. A pair of strong, warm arms wrapped around his waist from behind. Raymond pulled Julian back against his chest, burying his face in the crook of Julian's neck, inhaling the sweet, pure scent of jasmine that was now entirely free of fear. "He's safe, Julian," Raymond murmured, his voice a low, comforting hum against Julian's skin. "The media has been completely blacked out. Arthur's records have been permanently expunged from the state system. It's over. You protected him. Julian turned around in Raymond's arms, looking up into the face of the alpha who had risked his entire global reputation, his family name, and his legal power to shield a child that wasn't even his own blood. The last wall around Julian's heart didn't just crack, it shattered into dust. "Why did you do it, Raymond?" Julian asked, his voice trembling with a raw, beautiful emotion. "You could have used this scandal to destroy my market share. You could have exposed me." Raymond smiled, a gentle, devoted look in his stormy eyes as he cupped Julian's face in his large hands. "Because an empire means nothing without a king to share it with," Raymond whispered, leaning down until his lips were just inches from Julian's. "I don't want your market share, Julian. I want your trust. I want your heart. I want to build a new world with you." Julian reached up, his fingers tangling in Raymond's silver-streaked hair, and pulled the alpha down into a deep, passionate kiss. It was a kiss born of survival, of healing, and of a fierce, unyielding love that had finally found its true match. The scent of jasmine, leather, and bourbon swirled together in the quiet room, a perfect, unbreakable bond forged in the heat of battle. 2 weeks later, the city hospital's intensive care unit was silent, save for the rhythmic, artificial beep of a heart monitor. Arthur Vance lay in the bed, his body broken by the gunshot wound and a decade of severe, untreated psychological decay. He was a shell of a man, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, his powerful alpha scent entirely gone, replaced by the sterile smell of rubbing alcohol and impending death. The door to his room clicked open. Arthur turned his head weakly. He expected a doctor or a police officer. Instead, he saw Julian. Julian wore a flawless, cream-colored wool coat. He looked radiant, his silver eyes bright, his skin glowing with a vital, healthy energy. He carried no armor today, no cold corporate mask. He was a man completely at peace with his soul. Beside him stood Raymond, his large frame imposing and protective, his hand holding Julian's with a firm, unyielding grip. Arthur's breath hitched. He looked at Julian, then at Raymond, his eyes widening as he realized the truth. He saw the way their scents mingled in the air. The perfect, natural harmony of a true bond. "Julian." Arthur croaked, his voice barely a whisper. You found him. Raymond, you took him." Julian walked to the foot of the bed, looking down at his former husband with neither hatred nor anger. There was only a profound, detached pity in his silver eyes. "The search is over, Arthur," Julian said, his voice smooth and clear. "Leo is safe. He is far away from this city, living a life of luxury and love. He knows your name only as a cautionary tale of a weak man who allowed his own ego to destroy everything he had." Arthur let out a ragged, weeping breath, tears spilling into his ears. "Please. Julian, forgive me, just a piece of paper, a photograph." "No," Julian said flatly, his voice cutting off the dying man's pleas. "You do not get a piece of him. You traded your right to be a father the moment you signed the papers to send a pregnant Omega to a concrete hell. I came here today not to punish you, Arthur. I came to show you what a real alpha looks like." Julian looked up at Raymond, a beautiful, genuine smile breaking across his lips. Raymond looked back at him with an adoration that made Arthur's heart break completely. "Raymond didn't conquer me," Julian told the dying man. "He didn't use my weakness against me. He stood as my shield when the world was burning. He loved my scars until they turned into armor. He is the father Leo will one day know about, the man who protected his family." Arthur stared at them, his chest heaving as the heart monitor began to beep erratically, his vitals dropping as the sheer weight of his regret finally crushed his remaining life force. He saw the absolute, beautiful kingdom Julian had built out of the ruin of his past, a kingdom that Arthur could never, ever enter. Julian turned his back on the bed, slotting his hand perfectly into Raymond's. "Let's go home, Raymond," Julian said softly. Always, my king, Raymond replied, kissing the top of Julian's head as they walked out into the corridor, leaving the ghosts of the past behind them forever. The coastal estate in southern France was situated on a high cliff overlooking the sapphire-blue waters of the Mediterranean. The air was warm, sweet with the scent of wild lavender, blooming jasmine, and the crisp, salty tang of the sea. From the stone terrace of the grand villa, Julian stood watching the beach below. Leo was 11 now. He was running along the shoreline, his laughter echoing up the cliffs as he chased a golden retriever through the surf. His adoptive parents sat nearby under a white canvas umbrella, reading books and smiling at the boy's antics. Leo was thriving. He was fluent in French, top of his class in music, and completely protected from the dark history of his birth. He knew Julian as Uncle Julian, a wealthy, loving guardian who visited every month and brought him the finest gifts from around the world. It was a compromise that gave Julian his son's presence while keeping the boy's innocence entirely intact. A pair of strong, familiar arms wrapped around Julian's waist from behind, pulling him back against a warm, broad chest. Raymond rested his chin on Julian's shoulder, his scent of leather and bourbon instantly mixing with the coastal breeze. "He's getting taller," Raymond murmured, watching the boy step into the waves. "He's going to be a formidable man one day, Julian." "He will be a good man," Julian corrected softly, leaning back into his mate's embrace, his heart filled with an absolute, unshakable peace. "Because he is being raised in the light. Not in a boardroom, and not behind iron bars." Raymond smiled, his hands moving down to rest over Julian's flat stomach. Over the past few months, with his suppressants completely gone and his body fully healed by Raymond's presence, Julian's biology had fully restored itself. A faint, new warmth was beginning to bloom deep within his core, a secret they had discovered just yesterday. "And what about the new one?" Raymond whispered, his voice thick with a profound, emotional reverence. "Will this one be raised in the light too?" Julian turned around in Raymond's arms, his silver eyes shining with a brilliant, joyful light that had once been stolen from him, but had now returned 1,000 times brighter. He reached up, cupping Raymond's rugged face, looking into the eyes of the alpha who had given him back his life. "This one will have their father from the very first breath," Julian whispered, his voice a melody of pure love. "This one will never know what a cell looks like. We have built an empire, Raymond. Not an empire of shadows or revenge, but an empire of love." As Raymond leaned down to capture his lips in a deep, beautiful kiss, the waves crashed against the cliffs below, washing away the last traces of the old scars, leaving behind a vast, endless ocean of a bright and golden future.
Thank you for watching, dear darlings. Don't forget to like and subscribe the channel for more such story.